There is a scene towards the beginning of Aquaman, and it's in the trailers, so bringing this up isn't really a spoiler, wherein young Arthur is at the aquarium and is bullied for talking to the fish. At first the two bullies are overpowering Arthur until a shark starts banging its head against the glass trying to break out and save him. All of this, of course, leads to a moment in which young Arthur stands in front of the tank with an entire army of oceanic life behind him. This scene is a prime example of how to take something which has long been treated as a joke and make it cool. So in a way, it summarizes the Aquaman movie perfectly. Let's face it, folks, the Aquaman movie had an uphill battle before it. Not only is it part of a cinematic universe that's very popular to hate, it's also, well, an Aquaman movie. Aquaman has, for the longest time, not been considered a very useful superhero. It all really started, of course, in the Super Friends cartoon, wherein Aquaman was a part of the team alongside Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and Robin for some reason, but he was always put in situations where his powers were no good. From that point on, he was basically considered a joke. He still had his supporters, people who said, no, you don't get it. Aquaman's actually a really great hero. He's patrolling the 2/3 of the planet covered in water entirely by himself, whereas Batman can barely keep control of one city with help. But even with this insistence, people never really thought Aquaman was a cool character. This movie is probably going to change a lot of people's minds. Yes, Aquaman is great. Well, it's not perfect, but it is great. I'm just gonna get the two complaints I have about this movie out of the way first. For more or less the first half of the runtime, Aquaman the movie leans heavily into the realm of bathos. For the uninitiated, bathos basically means an abrupt insertion of something comedic into a dramatic scene. That's not the only definition, but it is the most commonly used one, especially in film, and it's the kind we see here. Now, bathos in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does take a certain level of finesse in order to execute. Now, the bathos in Aquaman's first half isn't bad, but it does skirt the line of being overused. It just got to a certain point where I could recognize the pattern and see it coming. The mythology is being expounded upon, the character who's speaking is being very serious and dramatic, the music is swelling, and then Jason Momoa, at his most Jason Momoa-iest, just says, yeah, I'm not going to take this seriously at all, whatever, dude. Now, this flippant behavior is actually part of his character arc, so I don't think it shouldn't have been in the movie. I just think maybe it should have been dialed back a little. Or else handled with a bit more finesse. And then there was the overuse of people being caught off guard by sudden explosions that kick off action scenes. Every action movie has at least one moment like that, maybe two, but again, Aquaman kind of overused that. But really, those are the only major complaints I have after my first viewing. Everything else about the movie is incredibly well done. All the performances are good. All the special effects are good, and in fact the digital stuff blends in quite seamlessly with the practical stuff, which is noticeable because you always believe the characters are underwater without it looking fake. And a lot of digital work had to go into that. The action is very exciting. The story itself is a pretty straightforward treasure hunting quest reminiscent of Indiana Jones, if you can believe it, but that's not a bad comparison to make. Yet again, we see Aquaman as another example of a comic book movie that leans into its comic bookiness, right down to the point where, at the end, the villain actually has an expressive mask. I'm not kidding, when Orm, the Ocean Master, dons the full helmet at the end, the eyes are moving. And it's not explained as lenses like the MCU's version of Spider-Man, it just moves because that's what would happen in a comic book. And as for the new environment of Atlantis, it looks amazing. Part of the reason why people don't think Aquaman could work as a character is because it takes place under the ocean, and there's this weird belief in storytelling that the ocean is not a place where good storytelling happens. Because people don't live there, and therefore there's nothing exciting that happens there. You know, unless you're in a submarine. Well, Atlantis is quite an environment to behold. That place where the Mother Box was being kept in Justice League, that was just the tip of the iceberg. The soundtrack works, except for the modern pop music that they insert every now and then. I'm just not that big a fan of modern pop. And they go to locations in this movie that, well, I don't really want to spoil anything, but, well, let's just say I'm surprised they actually showed up. But what also really stands out to me about Aquaman, or at least the one thing I can tell you without getting into spoiler territory, is that it stands entirely on its own. That's something I think is missing from a lot of comic book movies these days. The MCU these days is far more concerned about the universe and far less concerned about just letting the heroes stand on their own. Aquaman is allowed to stand on his own. There is one single line referring to the events of Justice League, and that's it. If you hadn't seen any other DCEU film up to this point, you could watch Aquaman and not be lost. In short, see this movie. It doesn't matter how you felt about the DCEU up to this point, see this movie. It is worth it. As I heard one fellow moviegoer say as I left the theater, Aquaman is cool again. So if you've seen it, feel free to leave your thoughts on it in the comments section below. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.